Hi, thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. American Christianity overemphasizes God's grace to the point that we ignore God's wrath and punishment. We believe that God's grace will overlook any and every sin. However, the Bible warns us there is a limit to God's grace. Exodus 33 tells us that Moses was very highly regarded by Yahweh. But then in Jeremiah 15, we see that the Israelites were so sinful that even Moses could not persuade Yahweh to give grace to the Israelites. Now that's a warning to us. You see, James 5 tells us the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. However, just as the Israelites had sinned so badly that Moses was not able to rescue them from God's wrath, so too we should be afraid of being so sinful that even the prayer of a righteous man could not rescue us from God's wrath. Now let's take a closer look at this. We'll read in Exodus 33 starting at verse 7. The context of this is the Israelites are at Mount Sinai. God is giving them the Mosaic law, and we read this in verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought Yahweh would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And it came about whenever Moses went out to the tent that all the people would rise and stand, each at the entrance of his tent, and gaze after Moses until he entered the tent. Whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and Yahweh would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would arise and worship, each at the entrance of his tent. Thus, Yahweh used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So we have this story here of this tent outside the camp that Moses used to go to talk to Yahweh face to face. And we see here at the end of verse 11, thus Yahweh used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. So this tells us that Yahweh regarded Moses above every other Israelite, because Moses was the only Israelite that Yahweh would speak to face. However, we get to Jeremiah 15 and we see that there was a limit to the regard that Yahweh had for Moses. The context of Jeremiah 15 is that Jeremiah is warning the Israelites about their sin and warning them of the wrath that would come from God because of their sin. And we read this in verse 1. Then Yahweh said to Jeremiah, even though Moses and Samuel were to stand before me, my heart would not be with this people, the Israelites. Send them away from my presence and let them go. So we see here again that Yahweh highly regarded Moses because Yahweh singled out Moses and Samuel as being the two who were the most righteous, the most likely to be able to persuade God to turn from his anger. But we're told here that the Israelites were so sinful that even Moses and Samuel would not be able to persuade Yahweh to give grace to the Israelites and overlook their sin. Now this is a warning to us that there is a limit to God's grace. You see, James 5 tells us in verse 16, therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. The effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. And so notice the last sentence, the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. And so just as Moses was highly regarded and able to persuade God to turn from his wrath, so too righteous men are highly regarded by God and able to accomplish much with their prayers. However, just as we saw that the Israelites were so sinful that even Moses could not persuade Yahweh to turn from his anger, so too we should be afraid of being so sinful that even the prayer of a righteous man would not be able to save us from the wrath of God. So again, American Christianity overemphasizes God's grace to the point that we ignore God's wrath and punishment, and we believe that God's grace will overlook any and every sin. However, the Bible warns us there is a limit to God's grace. We see in Exodus 33 that Moses was highly regarded by Yahweh, but we see in Jeremiah 15 that there was a limit to Moses' ability to persuade God to turn from his wrath. And likewise, we see in James 5 that the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. However, just as we saw that the Israelites were so sinful that even Moses could not rescue them, likewise we should be afraid of being so sinful that even the effective prayer of a righteous man cannot rescue us from the wrath of God. If you haven't joined my Patreon page yet, please do so. By joining my page, you will be the first to receive my content. Also, you will make sure that you never miss out on any of my content. In order to sign up, go to BibleMountain.com, click on Patreon, and that will take you to a sign-up page. Once again, thank you for watching BibleMountain.com.